I've got a lot of information here tonight. Some of it may not be relative after listening to what you're looking for. So we might breeze through some of that stuff, like the history of the program. I don't know if that's of too much interest to you, whereas the actual operation and what it does for you might be more interesting. So we'll just play that by ear. So what is the SBIR program? That's what we're going to talk about. And when I usually do this, I say, I guess I should stay out of the way of the projector. 3 things to remember: where it came from, what it does, and how's it going to benefit you. I put down differences between the agencies because there's 11 agencies that do this. And each one's a little different. You mentioned DOD. They're going to probably have the most stringent rules. And you go to some place like the NSF, and it's going to be a little less. If you want, Sheldon, I can probably just email you a copy of the slides. You don't need to worry about it.
That was easy. Thank you. But yeah, if you want to be right there, I mean,
Sure. So the SBIR program started really, the roots of it started back in 1970. And what happened at that time is there was a lot of, well, we'll go into that in the next slide. The next thing I put on this one is just, it's been renewed about 4 times through the history since 1978 when it was first initiated. Each time Congress has to say, yes, we're going to authorize this program to fund small businesses. The last time it was reauthorized was in 2012, the Defense Authorization Act of 2012, and Obama signed that into law on December, I think it was 27th of 2011, and that extends that program through 2017. Now in 2017, we'll have to reauthorize it again through Congress, but I don't see how it will not be reauthorized. It's a really good program. Before the SBIR program started, there was a program that President Nixon and cahoots with Congress decided we're not getting research and development from business anymore. The United States is getting passed by foreign countries. So how do we spur research and development in this country? And they came up with a program at that time called RAN, which stood for Research Applied to National Needs. Now that program was great, but it really focused on big business. Only a small portion, about 10% of it, went to small business. But there was a guy in the National Science Foundation, his name was Roland Tibbets, and Roland was an administrator for the RAND program, and he decided, I really think this would be a great program if we funneled it to small business. So he set up a pilot program within the NSF, with National Science Foundation, to do this funding of research and development within NSF. That's the beginning of the SBIR. Roland Tibbets is considered the grandfather of the SBIR program. So he started it in NSF. So it was an NSF-only program to start with. One of the early success stories, and I always like to put this in there, everybody's familiar probably with Norton Antivirus. Symantec was the company. Symantec was started basically by SBIR funding out of the NSF. They got one of the first NSF awards. The company really floundered, went bankrupt in 1982, still had some open SBIRs. So the program manager that was managing those went to the NSF and said, I'm going to start a new company. I'd like to get the funding from those SBIRs to continue this work. They granted it to him, and that company was Symantec. You know where it is today. Anyway, essentially what happened is through lobbying, through all kinds of pressure, the other agencies decided, we want to see a program like this too. So they started in the early 80s getting a lot of momentum going, and the SBIR Development Act of 1982 went into effect and created the SBIR program. And it basically said any agency within the federal government that has extramural, I always say intramural because I played intramurals, but extramural funding for R&D that's over $100 million has to channel some of that into the SBIR program. And it started out, it was only 0.2% of that extramural budget, but in 1983, that amounted to $43 million. So $43 million went in that year to SBIR program. Today, that's over 75 million. So it has really grown over the years. There's a lot of really good stuff going on there. The goals of the act were, number one, to get research and development going in this country. But one of the sub-goals there, and it's not really listed here, is to create jobs. The government realizes that this is a great way to create jobs, and so that's what really drives this program, is not only the research and development, but creating jobs. And so that's why I think it's going to be re-upped in 2017, is not only because of the success in creating new products, new research and development, but in creating jobs. It has created a tremendous amount of jobs. One of the other things that they talked about as a goal in the original act was to foster and encourage participation by socially disadvantaged small businesses. Now that's a goal, but that's a hard one to prove. And I don't know that even today that they still prove that that happens, but they still list it as a goal.
Do you know what that would be like, small business to start? I mean, what's the criterion, or is there a hard criterion?
For small business?
Or the socially disadvantaged business?
Yeah, the Small Business Administration has a regular definition of what that is.
Okay.
So socially disadvantaged means the owner has to be in the social disadvantaged definition. It's usually, I can't remember exactly what it is. It's from a minority and has to have a certain level of income below a certain point of level of income, and then they become a socially disadvantaged business. But the Small Business Administration has a regular definition for what that is. Another good success story after it became the SBIR program was Qualcomm. And they actually won, over the first several years of their existence, 12 SBIR awards for a total of almost $2 million, and basically developed everything that we've got here. The workings of this little cell phone came out of that work. So that's why people know that it works. I'm going to skip over this stuff. These are the renewals that I don't think we care too much about. There were some studies done in the late 90s and the early thousands. One of them was chaired by Gordon Moore. Is anybody familiar with Gordon Moore?
Moore's Law.
Exactly. Gordon, he was I believe it was Intel, but he was one of the early pioneers in the integrated circuits. And he came up with a law in the early days saying that every 2 years, the number of transistors in an integrated circuit, the capability for the number of transistors in that circuit will double. And that law has held true since about 1975 till today. It still holds true. That's why you have a computer in your pocket, is because they're able to put more transistors, twice as many transistors every 2 years on the chip.
And it'll be half the cost, too.
And at half the cost, right. Anyway, he chaired a study for the government in '98 for the effectiveness, and they looked at mainly the DoD program, because that's the biggest one, and found that it does contribute to the mission goals, found that it was a fast-track program that encouraged commercialization, and it was working. So part of that study was what caused this thing to refuel itself in the early 2000s. And so it was reauthorized in 2000. Again, there was a study done in 2008. In that year, they found that 96% of the funding, I told you there was 11 agencies, 96% of the funding came from those 5 agencies: Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, NASA, Department of Energy, and National Science Foundation. The other 6 agencies got the remaining 4% of the funding. Let's skip over that a little bit. This is the reauthorization that President Obama signed in 2011, reauthorized it for 6 years. He increased the allocation. Remember when it first started, it was 0.2% of the extramural budget? Well, it was 2.5% in 2011. It is 3% this year, 2016, and it goes to 3.2% next year of their extramural budget. So if the Department of Defense has $100 million, that means they're going to have $3.2 million worth of, and obviously their budget's bigger than that. I'm just using that for an example.
The STTR?
Good question. Thank you, Roger. I kind of skimmed over that a little earlier.
The percentages were so different.
Yep. SBIR stands for Small Business Innovative Research. So that's the program. STTR came into effect in 1992. It's about 10 years after the SBIR program. It stands for Small Business Technology Transfer. And what the difference is, the STTR, the small business that gets the award has to partner with a university or a national lab. So there's at least, I think it's a minimum of 30% that they have to spend with the university. So the idea is to pull the technology out of the university with that particular funding.
And that's the transfer part.
That's
okay.
the technology transfer part, yep. Now that's the only other difference in rule is with an SBIR, the government says you have to have a program manager, they call it a PI or a principal investigator, that is in the small business, primarily employed by the small business, which means he gets more than 51% of his income as an employee. With an STTR, that principal investigator could be out of the university. So it could be a professor with this technology to fuel it. So those are the only two differences basically, is you have to partner with the university or a national lab, and the PI could be from the university or national lab rather than from the company. But there's less money on the STTRs, as you can see, 0.3%. Actually, this year it's 0.4%, and it'll go to 0.45 next year. So that's a lot less money allocated to STTRs than there are SBIRs. One of the things that in the law that President Obama signed that they're trying to do is they found over those first 30 years of the program that some companies were out there going, oh, this is a great way to get money. I'm just going to continue to apply for SBIRs and keep getting money and keep doing this, but they weren't commercializing anything. And so the government's going, well, wait a minute, we want this to be something that results in a product or service that we need or want, or that the country needs or wants. So we're going to put a greater emphasis on commercialization, you see down there. Now, when you submit for an SBIR, if you have a history, they want to know, what have you done with that history? And they understand that everyone's not going to be a winner. That's just the nature of research and development. But they want to see that some of them are. So they're starting to take a real close look to eliminate what they call the SBIR houses, or the people that were just churning SBIRs and not churning out products. So that's just come into effect recently. The other thing that happened with that is they allowed the participation of venture capitalists. Up until 2011, there was very strict rules that they didn't want venture capital involved in the SBIR firms because they were afraid that that money would come out and then the venture capitalists would just take that money and they'd be funding venture capitalists rather than the technology development. Well, they finally decided Congress did in 2011 that, okay, maybe there are cases where we need more venture capital involvement. And one of those cases is when you get an SBIR from the NIH, National Institutes of Health. Because there you need a lot of extra money to fuel this development, and the government understands that. So they said, okay, now we'll allow up to 25% participation by the venture capitalists in NIH, DOE, and NSF type grants. DOD, it's still held down to about 12%. So those are some of the recent changes. So what's the process? And this is, I apologize, it's kind of an eye chart. But the process is, we start out with an idea. So up here, we have an SBIR or STTR. You have an idea, and you make a proposal to the agency, the appropriate agency we'll talk about in a little bit shortly. And you get a phase one if you're selected. That phase one is they call it phase one, but it's really to look at the proof of concept. Can I prove that this concept will work? It's mainly a research study. Last 6 months, and they fund up to $150,000 to do that. So all they're expecting at the end of that result is a report saying, here's what we've done to prove the concept. We think it's academically sound. Here's the proof, and we give it to the agency. The agency looks at it, they go, oh, I like that. I'll invite you to bid on phase two proposal. The phase two is where the majority of the money is. That is usually $1 million. There are some cases where it can go up to almost $2 million, depending on the agency, over 2 years. And that's where you really prove the product. Build a prototype, those type of things, get it ready. You'll hear people talk about phase three within the SBIR program, and phase three is really not funded by those SBIR dollars. But phase three is very important to the government. That's where they want you to take that to market. So they want to see that you have partners, other commercial businesses, big businesses that are interested in helping you develop that. Maybe it's in-kind money, maybe it's other research money, but it's to drive it to commercialization. That's the commercialization phase.
Is, my motivation to go to phase three, does that make me look better to get future SBIR grants?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And here's just probably a little bit better graphic to see that. The early exploitation, phase one, feasibility study like we talked about, the prototype development, phase two, where you're going to see product breakthroughs, et cetera, and then the commercialization and the transition into production is the phase three. And they really want to see, rather than the government fund that, they want to see you get funds from either the customer or from other business partner to fuel that. Wasn't that cute? So like I mentioned earlier, today there's about $75 billion of extramural spending in the federal budget. That means that roughly 3.5% of that, or $2.6 billion, go into the SBIR and STTR program. So that's a lot of money, $2.6 billion. Oops. Oh. Somehow that slide only brings up a line at a time. But one thing I wanted to mention is the non-dilutive funding. And I think that's really key when you're a small business and you're talking about, how do I get funding to do some of this? If you go to a venture capitalist, they're going to say, I want part of your business in exchange for this investment. The government says, no, I want to see either a report or I want to see a commercialization, something else. That's the deliverables I want. I don't want any of your business. So that means that you don't lose any of your business. That may not be enough to drive the whole product to market, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And again, this is just a graph showing that the federal government has that extramural R&D, about $75 billion, goes to universities, labs, and to some businesses, but they channel off that 3.5% specifically for small business.
What's the typical length of the process from application to award, like a phase one? What's that typical time frame usually?
Usually, and there's a month, anywhere from a month to 6 months, depending on the agency, from the time that they list the topics that they want to see to when they close acceptance of proposals. So you've got that period to deal with. Once they close for proposals, it usually takes anywhere from 2 months to 6 months to evaluate those and decide which ones they're going to award. It's roughly, currently, phase one is about 15% success rate. So there's quite a bit of competition. So of all the SBIRs that are submitted, 15% of them win. Phase twos are a little more successful. They're probably about 45% is the success rate on a phase two.
45 of the 15% that won the phase one.
Right, if you won that phase one and then you are invited to bid for a phase two, 45% of those that bid on the phase two will win it. But they
Is there a
know,
schedule for that? So is there a government schedule that you have to,
yeah,
it's all batched together?
and it varies with agency to
Oh,
agency.
okay.
They know that that's a problem, the length of time, and so they're trying to shorten those review cycles. But in practice, it hasn't shortened a great deal yet. So you're talking from the time you write that proposal and turn it in, it could be 6 months to 9 months before you get award. Like to be shorter, and in some cases it is, but realistically it's probably 6 to 9 months. So today, I mentioned the big five: Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, DOE, NASA, and NSF. But I also wanted to put this up here so you can see the different budget levels that the government's giving us. So the Department of Defense has almost $1.1 billion worth of money they're giving out. And every one of their contracts, every one of their awards is a contract. Now, each agency is different. For instance, Health and Human Services, a lot of their awards are grants. Grants and contracts, what's the difference between a grant and a contract? You know?
They just give you the money.
I know you do.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I see a grant as money with conditions, but it's given, it's a gift.
That's basically
And
right.
a contract, you gotta have an exchange.
That's right.
So that the contract, I guess, are you making products or putting out goods and services for the
You're
government?
delivering something.
Right, okay.
So in other
Something
words, in
tangible.
phase one,
Okay,
it might be a report. So they
okay.
might say on phase one with the DOE, it's a contract, so we're saying, we'll pay you $100,000, but we want to see this report at the end of 6 months that documents your technology, what you found, why it's viable, and why we should consider funding further. That's the exchange, like Roger said. We're exchanging this $100,000 if you're going to give me a report. On phase two, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to give you $1 million, and you're also going to give me a report, but you're also going to show me a prototype and how it works and why this is commercially viable. So that's the exchange. Whereas a grant, you go to NIH and they say, we're going to give you a grant. That might mean we're going to give you $100,000 and do with it what you can. We hope you can develop this vaccine, but if you can't, we're still giving you the money. Whereas on the contract side, if you don't turn that report in, guess what? You don't get all the money.
So there's no accountability with a grant?
There is some, but the key there is the exchange. That you're setting up that expectation that, yes, I'm giving you money, but I expect this in return. Whereas the grant, they're saying, I'm giving you this money, and I hope that you can do this.
You know, on the accountability, let's say I win a phase one and I get 100,000 and I buy, is there any control on how I spend that? I mean, I'm gonna buy maybe some machinery, some materials, I may be hiring a person or two.
That's correct.
So are they involved to that detail or?
Some of these are, yes. When you turn in the proposal, they're gonna wanna see a detailed budget
Okay.
of how you're gonna spend this money.
Can that include your own personal salary?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
But what if
Sure.
Any restrictions on that then?
There are.
Okay.
I mean, some people will go in there and say, well, my salary is, $500,000 a year. And the government goes, no, wait a minute. Show me how people similar to you are making that much money. They want to see just.
But if you have a track record, you could,
Yeah, what they typically want to see though are salary is for a CEO, for a project, or a scientist with this type of experience in the different areas of the country. And there's other ones too, but you use that as a basis. You go, okay, I've got this programmer over here, and he's very knowledgeable in this language, and on salary.com, I see where they pay programmers in the range of $150,000 to $175,000 for this expertise. So we're gonna pay him top of the line because we're a little bit special, our technology is cutting edge, so we're gonna pay him $175,000 a year, and here's why. But the government wants to see that.
Okay, all right.
Now, what if I spend 30,000 of that on a specialized machine? And I use it, and then at the end, of course, the machine's still good. Do I get to keep it?
In many cases, yes, that depends on the government.
Okay.
If you bought that machine for this SBIR and you used SBIR funds for it, then technically that machine belongs to the government. So at the end of the project, the government has to disposition what to do with that machine. And they might say, I disposition it as scrap.
Right, because it can have value at the end of the project, whereas the money
Right.
for materials and labor is gone.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, it's interesting to me which agencies do grants, like Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, Agriculture, and then these other agencies like NASA, DOD, Department of Commerce, that all do contracts. But it's interesting when you're searching for awards, what kind of award you're looking for.
And who determines whether it's a grant or, I mean, how do they come to that conclusion?
Well, again, back to it's agency specific on a lot of it. So Department of Defense, there's no question, it's gonna be a contract. NIH, it says contract or grant. Most of them coming out of the NIH are grants. But some of them are contracts if they're trying to develop a specific thing, if they want a deliverable. But NIH is typically a research organization within the government, so that's why a lot of theirs are grants. They understand that we don't have a cure for cancer. We're giving you money here to try and find something that will help us. But they might have something else, like somebody says, I have a new syringe that doesn't penetrate the skin but delivers the vaccine. Well, that might be a product that they're worth saying, I want to see a product at the end. That might be a contract. So that's why it depends on that agency. DOE is a little bit the same way. They aren't expecting the products. Department of Defense is a neat one because that's a built-in customer. If you're developing something for the Department of Defense, you may have a commercial market, but you also have a built-in customer in that the government probably wants to buy what you are developing.
Yeah.
How do you know which department to apply for?
Good question. I'll get to that in just a second.
Okay.
I put this up just to show you, and it's hard because it's in color and it doesn't show up very well here, but these, over the last 2 years, from 2014 through 2016, are where the awards were issued in SBIRs. The number one place was in the state of California. Number 2, Massachusetts. Number 3, Virginia. Number 4, Colorado.
And it's interesting, it's so regional, like the Midwest is,
Right,
it's nothing.
right. So what does an SBIR firm look like? Well, it looks like you guys. Could be somebody that hasn't formed a company yet. Could be a professor that's in a university that has an idea and he's going to form a company and he wants to take this idea to market. Could be a small company like yours, John, where you've gone, I've got this great idea of a product over here. I'd like to commercialize it. So it's a small business, but it could be from 1 to 490 people in that business. You see there that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, says it has to be less than 500 employees to qualify as a small business. So here's the solicitation schedule, and this is getting into answering some of the questions that you're getting to, Don, and we'll get to a little more detail on the next couple slides. But this is the schedule, and this is from last year, but this year's schedule is about the same. When the different agencies come out. So you'll see Department of Transportation came out with a list of topics in January. and those bids are due on March. But if you look at Department of Defense, came out on December 10th with a list of topics. Those were due proposals last week. So in other words, the topic list that they came out with in early December, all the proposals were due last week. So that's closed now. But the DoD has 3 submittals per year. There's another submittal that will come out in April, and another one that comes out in August. Some others, like NSF, has a couple of bids per year. There's one that comes out in February, should come out next week, and then another one that comes out in November.
Is it possible to get money from more than one agency?
It is. But you have to be careful because they are very specific about not funding the same research even in different agencies.
Okay.
So you might say, okay, I'm going to develop this hardware, and I'm going to do that with an SBIR from the DoD. But then I noticed NSF's got a topic over here, and I'm going to try and develop the software to make that hardware work with a grant from the NSF. So you're proposing the same product, but you're doing 2 different development tasks, really, with 2 different agencies.
Is there a website where the topics are published?
Mm-hmm.
That you can go in there and see what they're...
Yep. There is. And I'm glad you asked. This happens to be the, maybe I should have used your pointer, Roger. But this was the DoD solicitation came out last December with proposals we had last week. And that solicitation, this is just the front page, but it tells you when it was issued, when you can ask questions up until, and when proposals are due. And then there's about 50 to 60 pages behind this that tell you what they expect in the proposal, how they want you to write it. So that's the solicitation. That comes out and gives you all the information about how to write it, when it's due, all those logistics. And then in addition to that, they list, or they release a list of topics.
It's the in button.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. That's better than. So this, I know this is an eye chart, but this just happens to be the Army list out of the DoD solicitation. And actually, this is 1 page. There's about 5 pages of Army topics. So each one of these topics, you go down there and you say, okay, I'm looking at this one. It says low carbon, can't even read that, composite technology. And then you go over here later in the document, and this is right off of their website, off of the DoD website. It gives you a description of what they're looking for on that specific topic that was listed on that other list. And so this will tell you this topic is under the controls of the International Traffic and Arms Regulation, or ITAR Act. That's important to know, because if you're doing something for ITAR, that means you cannot release it outside the United States. It's controlled technology that we want to keep in this country. And I had an instance years ago where I worked for one of the big primes. We had an engineer working for us who had a green card and was from Canada. She was from, I think, Calgary. And we went in to talk with Raytheon, who was the prime on this project, and they kicked her out of the room. And we had to go through and take all of our files and lock them and restrict her out of our office from ever seeing those files. I mean, that's how serious this ITAR stuff is. She was Canadian. But it's very serious stuff. So it's important to know if that ITAR applies. But then they talk about what's the objective, and they'll list usually just a 1-sentence description. What's the objective of this particular topic that they're looking for? And then they'll give you a description. And in this description, this is where you look and see, does this match my idea? Does this match my technology, my product? Or close enough that I can say, yes, my research is going to benefit what you're looking for, Department of Defense, Army, but it's also going to benefit me because I may want to take it commercial. And so this is where you start in searching when you go to write your proposals. You find out which agencies releasing the topics back to that first list. You go to that agency, and then within the agency, you search SBIR topics, and they'll give you a list of the current topics, and you'll be able to see something like this that will tell you exactly what they're looking for. And like I said, that Army list was 5 pages of those topics, and you saw how dense that list is. Imagine 5 pages, so there's probably 150, 200 topics. That's under the Army. There's also a list under the Navy, the Air Force, the Army Research Lab, Special Operations Mission Lab. I mean, there's DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Topics. So there's probably 8 or 10 different divisions within the DoD that list topics. Now, Army, Air Force, and Navy probably have the biggest list, along with DARPA. Some of these others, like the medical branch of DoD, is a smaller list. But still, there's an awful lot of topics there to go through to see, does my technology apply to something that they're looking for?
That sounds similar to Fed BizOps. It's just kind of a,
It's similar to that, yes. The difference is Fed BizOps comes out every day, and it lists everything that the government is buying that day, plus everything that's still open that they listed last week or the week before. Where this is just specific to the SBIR topics, and like I say, remember that schedule where I said it's open on such and such a date?
right, yeah.
So what these topics come out on this date, on the release date. So you can start going through them there. But you have to have your proposal due here. So that gives you, like on this Department of Transportation, gives you 2 months. Actually, it gives you 3 months. No, 2.5, I guess 2. There was one that gave 3 months. Who was that?
It's usually about 2 months, it looks like.
Yeah, for most of them. I mean, the Department of Commerce, that's still 2 months. Here's the one I was thinking of, NSF. Those topics come out on February 26th, proposals due June 16th. Now, NSF's a little different than some of the other agencies. They don't necessarily, NSF comes out in theirs, and they usually have these 7 or 8 broad topic areas, and within there, they may have some guidelines, but they're not really looking for anything specific in the NSF. It's pretty wide open. So if you can't find a specific topic in the DoD solicitation, you usually can find an area in the NSF that it would fit.